There's 10 people so far.
This afternoon, as part of the African Roots Center Real History series, we welcome Reverend Nick Miles, who will present a program entitled Columbus, Discovery or Invasion. Spurred by an interest in this topic, which has raised many questions, most notably, why is Columbus Day even a federal holiday in the United States when Columbus never even landed on these shores? Nick will discuss prevailing myths, known facts, and their implications. He will also explore the contradictions and outright falsehoods of the Columbus story. Having served for 39 years as the pastor of the United Reformed Church in Bloomington, Reverend Miles is recently retired. He also served as coordinator of Aboriginal and Native ministries for the Reformed Church in America. Nick continues serving the larger church as an occasional preacher and consultant. He is also the lead singer and drum keeper of the Cloudbreaker Society, Association of Native Americans of the Mid-Hudson Valley. This program is funded in part by Humanities New York with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. I am very pleased to introduce Reverend Nick Miles.
Itoiki Oyasin, a saying of the Lakota people. It is said into all four directions, to the earth below and the great spirit above, inclusive of all things, as all are related. This is a marvelously brief but deep expression of what life is. It includes everything spiritual and material, everything seen and unseen, everything that is real. It includes the Creator who is above all and in all. It includes all men and women, all children who are now living on the face of the earth. It includes all creatures who fly in the air, walk or crawl on the earth or within the earth, and that swim in the waters. It includes the very earth itself and the air that surrounds it like a beautiful blanket. Itoiki Oyasin is a saying that recognizes all creation and the Creator as one great family. It extends kinship to everything that lives and moves and has its being. Nothing can happen to one part of this creation that does not, in some small way, happen to the rest of creation. All of creation should be harmonious and holy. Every part needs to be reverenced as holy and worthy of respect, so that it can have the freedom to carry out its duties and functions. The earth must not be poisoned and scraped away. The air must not be polluted. The waters must be kept clean. Animals and plants must not be hunted and used to extinction. Humanity must be free to praise and glorify the Creator by being alive and healthy, both in body and spirit. The Creator must be free to love and care for us, as only the Creator knows how to do. Itoiki Oyasin. So Wingapo, greetings in the Powhatan language. I am a member of the Pamunkey tribe, Powhatan Nation, and actually my mother, being a professional genealogist, was able to trace our family to Pocahontas's uncle, Opekankano, on the native side. The Powhatan territory covered the areas of what is today Virginia, Maryland, Washington, D.C., and probably parts of Delaware. My grandfather was a full-blood Pamunkey. My father and brother, previous chiefs of the tribe. And a little bit of trivia, actually, this past Tuesday, they just had their tribal elections. In fact, members of the tribe are given a pea and a corn. And the pea is a yes vote and the corn is a no vote. A name is proposed for election and you either vote that person in or out. My father grew up on the reservation until about the 3rd grade. My grandfather fished for shad particularly the Shad Row in the Pamunkey River, the Delaware, and the Hudson, coming up as far as Rhinebeck. But because of the racial integrity laws promoting discrimination against natives and Black people, he ended up in New Jersey as a farmer, supplying many a produce vegetable road stand. So being cautious about possible discrimination issues, even here in the North, neither my grandfather or father would talk about their native roots. So as a child, my exposure to my native roots consisted of traveling to Virginia for maybe a day and a half on a weekend, a couple of times a year. But for us as children, it was just a new place to play. Ceremonial events and powwows did not happen because they did not want to call attention to themselves. The reservation survived through the years by not rocking the boat. And my great uncle, who was chief of the Mattaponi tribe nearby, shared with me some of the ancient tribal traditions on a visit during a college vacation. So he gave me my native name, Tecumseh Red Cloud, meaning man of action, looking to high places. He was also a Baptist minister and knew that I had a calling to enter into some form of ministry, but that is another story. It was during this time, the late 60s, that I became more aware of my heritage. I began to learn more about my native roots. And at the same time, while the taking over of Alcatraz and the American Indian movement, many Native people reclaimed their identity. And then moving to New York, I became involved with the Association of Native Americans of the Mid-Hudson Valley and a student of Jack Preston on Anna's drum. So presently, I am honored to be the lead singer and drum keeper of our drum. And so before I begin talking about Columbus, we would like to sing for you the Creator Song. And so behind me is my wife, Linda, who traced her family to a great-grandmother who was left behind during the Trail of Tears. Her great-grandmother was a Cherokee. And then you have Charlene and JD, who are also behind me, that'll help me do singing the Creator Song, and then ending with the Delaware Healing Blessing Song at the end. It's a Ojibwe song, and it's partly a chant, and Miigwech Keche Amonatu means thank you, O Great Spirit.
On your left, under your chair.
Where?
Down on the floor.
Fell down. A song is always sung 4 times through in honor of the 4 directions, the 4 seasons, the 4 basic elements of the earth, and the 4 basic colors of the human race. That way, a song is always inclusive. Way up, way high, high, way high, oh. Way up, way high, high, way high, oh. Way up, way high, high, way high, oh. Way up. Way high, high, way high, ho. Miigwech Keche Amonatu. Way up, way high, high, way high, ho. Way up. Way high, high, way high, ho. Way up, way high, high, way high, ho. Way up, way hi, way hi ho. Way way hi, way hi ho. Make which money too. Way way hi, way hi ho. 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 Make which money too. Way way hi, way hi ho. Way way hi, way hi ho. So let me first of all say that I do not intend to idealize Native people, nor do I intend to demonize Europeans. But rather, I hope to present a picture of history that for Native Americans resulted in, one might describe, an American Holocaust. What has been described as a discovery was, in essence, an invasion. Arawak men and women emerged from their villages onto the island's beaches and swam out to get a closer look at this strange big boat. When Columbus and his sailors came ashore, carrying swords, speaking oddly, the Arawaks ran to greet them, brought them food, water, gifts. In a letter Columbus wrote to Lord Rafael Sanchez after his first voyage dated March 14, 1493, he reports being enormously impressed by indigenous people. And I quote from the Annals of America, Discovering the New World Encyclopedia, covering 1493 to 1754, Discovering a New World. As soon as they see that they are safe and have laid aside all fear, they are very simple and honest and exceedingly liberal with all they have. They exhibit great love toward all others in preference to themselves. They also give objects of great value for trifles and content themselves with very little or nothing in return. Men of great deference and kindness. And then Columbus later wrote of this in his log. They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things which they exchange for the glass beads and hawk's bells. They willingly traded everything they owned. They do not bear arms and do not know them. For I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. they would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. So these Arawaks of the Bahama Islands were much like native people on the mainland of the United States, who were remarkable for their hospitality and their belief in sharing. These traits did not stand out in the Europe of the Renaissance, dominated as it was by the religion of popes, the government of kings, and the frenzy for money that marked Western civilization and Christopher Columbus. Again, Columbus wrote, "As soon as I arrived in the Indies, on the first island which I found, I took some of the natives by force in order that they might learn and might give me information of whatever there is in these parts." So the information that Columbus wanted most was, where's the gold? He had persuaded the king and queen of Spain to finance an expedition to the lands. The wealth he expected would be on the other side of the Atlantic, the Indies and Asia, gold and spices. For like other informed people of his time, he knew the world was round and he could sail west in order to get to the Far East. There was gold in Asia, it was thought, and certainly silks and spices, for Marco Polo and others had brought back marvelous things from their overland expeditions centuries before. And now that the Turks had conquered Constantinople and the Eastern Mediterranean and controlled the land routes to Asia, a sea route was needed. So in return for bringing back gold and spices, they promised Columbus 10% of the profits, governorship over newfound lands, and the fame that would go with a new title, Admiral of the Ocean Sea. He was a merchant's clerk from the Italian city of Genoa, part-time weaver, the son of a skilled weaver, and an expert sailor. And so he set out with 3 sailing ships, the largest of which was the Santa Maria, perhaps 100 feet long, and 39 crew members. Columbus would never have made it to Asia, which was thousands of miles farther away than he had calculated, imagining a smaller world. He would have been doomed by that great expanse of sea. But he was lucky. 1/4 of the way there, he came upon an unknown, uncharted land that lay between Europe and Asia, the so-called Americas. So approaching land, they were met by the Arawak Natives who swam out to greet them. The Arawaks lived in village communes, had a developed agriculture of corn, yams, cassava, yucca, a root vegetable, and they could spin and weave, but they had no horses or work animals. They had no iron, but there were tiny gold ornaments in their ears. And this was to have enormous consequences because it led Columbus to take some of them aboard ship as prisoners because he insisted that they guide him to the source of the gold. He then sailed to what is now Cuba and then to Hispaniola, the island which we today consist of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And there, bits of visible gold in the rivers and the gold mask presented to Columbus by a local native chief led to wild visions of gold fields. On Hispaniola, out of timbers from the Santa Maria, which had run aground, Columbus built a fort, the first European military base in the Western Hemisphere. He called it Navidad, Christmas, and left crew members there with instructions to find and store the gold. He took more native prisoners and put them aboard his 2 remaining ships. And at one part of the island, he got into a fight with natives who refused to trade as many bows and arrows as he and his men wanted. And so two were run through with swords and bled to death. And then the Nina and the Pinta set sail for the Azores and Spain. And when the weather turned cold, many of the native prisoners began to die. Columbus's report to the court in Madrid was extravagant. He insisted he had reached Asia, it was Cuba, and an island off the coast of China, Hispaniola. His descriptions were part fact and part fiction. He writes, "The land is a miracle. Mountains and hills, plains and pastures are both fertile and beautiful. The harbors are unbelievably good, and there are many wide rivers of which the majority contain gold. There are many spices and great mines of gold and other metals. The Indians," Columbus reported, "are so naive and so free with their possessions that no one who has not witnessed them would believe it. And when you ask for something they have, they never say no. To the contrary, they offer to share with anyone." And he concluded his report by asking for a little help from their majesties. And in return, he would bring them from his next voyage as much gold as they need and as many slaves as they ask. And he was full of religious talk. He says, "Thus the eternal God, our Lord, gives victory to those who follow his way over apparent impossibilities." You see, Columbus was operating under the auspices of the discovery doctrine issued by Pope Nicholas V in 1452. The Romanus Pontifex declared war against all non-Christians throughout the world, sanctioning and promoting the conquest, colonization, and exploitation of non-Christian nations and their territories. Non-Christians were considered enemies of the Catholic faith, and as such, less than human. Thus, at the time, King Alfonso of Portugal was allowed to capture, vanquish, and subdue the Saracens, which was an Arabic tribe of Syria, pagans, and other enemies of Christ, to put them into perpetual slavery and to take all their possessions and property. And Portugal proceeded to make discoveries all along the western coast of Africa, claiming many lands as Portuguese territory. Thus, when Columbus sailed west in 1492, he did so with the understanding that he was authorized to take possession of any lands he discovered that was not under the dominion of any Christian rulers. Pope Alexander VI issued a full inter cetera document in 1493 to affirm this right, granting to Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, the right to conquered lands already discovered by Columbus and any future endeavors of discovery. These two papal bulls, in essence, asserted that Christian nations had a divine right to claim ultimate authority over any newly discovered non-Christian inhabitants and their lands. This belief, the doctrine of discovery, was used by other nations in future generations, and it was later adopted by U.S. law, which I will come back to later. Because of Columbus's exaggerated report and promises, his second expedition was given 17 ships and more than 1,200 men. The aim was very clear: slaves and gold. From his base on Haiti, Columbus sent expedition after expedition into the interior parts. They found no gold fields, but had to fill up the ships returning to Spain with some kind of dividend. So in the year 1495, they went on a great slave raid, rounded up 1,500 Arawak men, women, and children, put them in pens guarded by Spaniards, and then picked the 500 best specimens to load onto ships. And of those 500, 200 died en route. The rest arrived alive in Spain and were put up for sale by the archdeacon of the town, who reported that although the slaves were naked as the day they were born, they showed no more embarrassment than animals. And then Columbus later wrote, "Let us, in the name of the Holy Trinity, go on sending all the slaves that can be sold." But too many of the slaves died in captivity. And so Columbus, desperate to pay back dividends to those who had invested, had to make good his promise to fill the ships with gold. In Haiti, where he and his men imagined huge gold fields to exist, they ordered all persons 14 years or older to collect a certain quantity of gold every 3 months. When they brought it, they were given copper tokens to hang around their necks. Natives found without a copper token had their hands cut off and bled to death. The Indians had been given an impossible task. The only gold around were bits of dust garnered from the streams, and so they fled and were hunted down with dogs and killed, many of them. Trying to put together an army of resistance, the Arawaks faced Spaniards who had armor, muskets, swords, horses. And when the Spaniards took prisoners, they hanged them or burned them to death. Among the Arawaks, mass suicides began with cassava poison. Infants were killed to save them from the Spaniards. And the chief source, and on many matters the only source of information about what happened on the islands after Columbus came, is Bartolome de las Casas, who as a young priest participated in the conquest of Cuba. And for a time, he owned a plantation on which native slaves worked. But he gave that up and became a vehement critic of Spanish cruelty. Las Casas transcribed Columbus's journal, and then in his 50s began a multi-volume history of the Indies. And in it, he describes the Indians. They are agile, he says, and can swim long distances, especially the women. They are not completely peaceful because they do battle from time to time with other tribes, but their casualties seem small, and they fight when they are individually moved to do so because of some small grievance, not on the orders of captains or kings. And then in book 2 of his History of the Indies, the Casas, who at first urged replacing Indians by black slaves, thinking they were stronger and would survive, but later relented when he saw the effects on blacks, tells about the treatment of the Indians by the Spaniards. It is a unique account, deserves to be quoted at length, but I'll quote just little bit of it. Endless testimonies prove the mild and pacific temperament of the natives, but our work was to exasperate, ravage, kill, mangle, and destroy. Small wonder then if they tried to kill one of us now and then. The admiral, it is true, was blind as those who came after him, and he was so anxious to please the king that he committed irreparable crimes against the natives. Las Casas tells how the Spaniards grew more conceited every day, and after a while refused to walk any distance. They rode on the backs of Indians if they were in a hurry, or were carried on hammocks by Indians running in relays. In this case, they also had Indians carry large leaves to shade them from the sun, and others to fan them with goose wings. Total control led to total cruelty. So thus began the history over 500 years ago of the European invasion of native settlements in the Americas. And that beginning, when you read Las Casas, even if his figures are exaggerated, I mean, were there 3 million Indians to begin with, as he says, or less than 1 million, as some historians have calculated, or 8 million, as others now believe? That beginning is conquest, slavery, death. And when we read the history books given to children in the United States, at least when I grew up many, many years ago, it also starts with heroic adventures. There is no bloodshed, and Columbus Day is a celebration. And what Columbus did to the Arawaks of the Bahamas, Cortez did to the Aztecs of Mexico, Pizarro to the Incas of Peru, and the English settlers of Virginia and Massachusetts to the Powhatans and the Pequots. So I would like to offer some Native history in the United States, because it makes you wonder why we didn't have a better immigration policy. In the North American English colonies, the pattern was set early, as Columbus had set it in the islands of the Bahamas. In 1585, before there was any permanent English settlement in Virginia, Richard Grenville landed there with 7 ships. The natives he met were hospitable, but when one of them supposedly stole a small silver cup, Grenville sacked and burned the entire village. Jamestown itself was set up inside the territory of a native confederacy led by the chief Powhatan. Powhatan watched the English settle on his people's land, but did not attack, maintaining a posture of coolness. And when the English were going through their starving time in the winter of 1610, some of them ran off to join the natives, where they would at least be fed. And when the summer came, the governor of the colony sent a messenger to ask Powhatan to return the runaways, whereupon Powhatan, according to the English account, replied with none other than proud and disdainful answers. So some soldiers were therefore sent out to take revenge. They fell upon an Indian settlement, killed 15 or 16 Indians, burned the houses, cut down the corn growing around the village, took the queen of the tribe and her children into boats, and then ended up throwing the children overboard and again shooting out their brains in the water. And the queen was later taken off and stabbed to death. 12 years later, in 1622, the natives, alarmed as the English settlements kept growing in numbers, apparently decided to try to wipe them out for good. So they went on a rampage and killed many, 347 men, women, and children. And then from then on, it was total war. Not able to enslave the Indians, not able to live with them, the English decided to exterminate them. Edmund Morgan writes in The History of Early Virginia, American Slavery, American Freedom, these words: "Since the Indians were better woodsmen than the English and virtually impossible to track down, the method was to feign peaceful intentions, let them settle down, plant their corn wherever they choose, and then just before harvest, fall upon them, killing as many as possible and burning the corn. And within 2 or 3 years, the English had avenged the deaths of that day many times over." However, in that first year of the white man in Virginia, 1607, Powhatan had addressed a plea to John Smith that turned out prophetic. How authentic it is may be in doubt, but it is so much like so many Indian statements that it may be taken as, if not the rough letter of the first plea, but the exact spirit of it. And this is what Powhatan said: "I have seen 2 generations of my people die. I know the difference between peace and war better than any man in my country. I am now grown old and must die soon. My authority must descend to my brothers, Opichapan, Opikankano, and Katato, and then to my 2 sisters, and then to my 2 daughters. I wish them to know as much as I do, and that your love to them may be like mine to you. Why will you take by force what you may quietly have by love? Why will you destroy us who supply you with food? What can you get by war? I mean, we can hide our provisions and run into the woods, and then you will starve for wrongdoing your friends. Why are you jealous of us? Why are you unarmed and willing to give you what you ask? And we are unarmed and willing to give you what you ask, if you come in a friendly manner, and not so simple as to know that it is much better to eat good meat, sleep comfortably, live quietly with my wives and children, laugh and be merry with the English, and trade for their copper and hatchets, than to run away from them and to lie cold in the woods, feed on acorns, roots, and such trash, and be hunted that I can neither eat nor sleep. In these wars, my men must sit up watching, and if a twig break, they all cry out, 'Here comes Captain Smith.' And so I must end my miserable life. Take away your guns and swords, the cause of all our jealousy, or you may all die in the same manner." When the Pilgrims came to New England, they too were coming not to vacant land, but to territory inhabited by tribes of natives. The governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, John Winthrop, created the excuse to take Indian land by declaring the area legally a vacuum. The Indians, he said, had not subdued the land and therefore had only a natural right to it, but not a civil right. A natural right did not have any legal standing. The Puritans also appealed to the Bible. Psalm 2:8, for example, "Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession." And to justify their use of force to take the land, they cited Romans 13:2, "Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation." So behind the English invasion of North America, behind their massacre of Indians, their deception, their brutality, was that powerful drive born in civilization based on private property. It was a morally ambiguous drive. The need for space, for land, was a real human need. But in conditions of scarcity, in a barbarous epoch of history ruled by competition, this human need was transformed into the murder of whole peoples. And from the Adirondacks to the Great Lakes, in what is now Pennsylvania and Upper New York, lived the most powerful of the northeastern tribes, the League of the Iroquois, which included the Mohawks, people of the Flint, the Oneidas, people of the Stone, the Onondagas, people of the mountain, Cayuga, people of the landing, and Senecas, the great hill people, thousands of people bound together by a common Iroquois language, Haudenosaunee. In the vision of the Mohawk chief, Hiawatha, the legendary Degawanita, spoke to the Iroquois. We bind ourselves together by taking hold of each other's hands so firmly and forming a circle so strong that if a tree should fall upon it, it could not shake nor break it, so that our people and grandchildren shall remain in a circle of security, peace, and happiness. In the villages of the Iroquois, land was owned in common and worked in common. Hunting was done together, and the earth was divided among the members of the village. Houses were considered common property and were shared by several families. The concept of private ownership of land and homes was foreign to the Iroquois. A French Jesuit priest who encountered them in 1650s wrote, "No poorhouses are needed among them because they are neither beggars nor paupers. Their kindness, humanity, and courtesy not only makes them liberal with what they have, but causes them to possess hardly anything except in common." And I remember this even in Virginia, going down there as a child on my own reservation. We never knew who we were going to stay with because everybody was an aunt or an uncle. And we were all split up as children. And also I remember they always shared their gardens. Whoever's garden came in first shared it with others. When they did hunting, and then that was also shared as well as the fish. And all of this was in sharp contrast to European values as brought over by the first colonists, a society of rich and poor, controlled by priests, by governors, by male heads of families. Gary Nash describes Iroquois culture this way: no laws and ordinances, sheriffs and constables, judges and juries, or courts or jails, the apparatus of authority in European societies, were to be found in the Northeast woodlands prior to European arrival. And yet boundaries of acceptable behavior were firmly set. Though priding themselves on the autonomous individual, the Iroquois maintained a strict sense of right and wrong. He who stole another's food or acted valorously in war was shamed by his people and ostracized from their company until he had atoned for his actions and demonstrated to their satisfaction that he had morally purified himself. And not only the Iroquois, but other Indian tribes behaved the same way. So back to Columbus. Columbus Day, as we know it in the United States, was invented by the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic fraternal service organization. Back in the 1930s, they were looking for a Catholic hero as a role model their kids could look up to. In 1934, as a result of lobbying by the Knights of Columbus, Congress and President Franklin Roosevelt signed Columbus Day into law as a federal holiday to honor this courageous explorer, or so we thought. So to reiterate, there are several problems with this. First of all, Columbus wasn't the first European to discover America. As we all know, the Viking Leif Erikson probably founded a Norse village on Newfoundland some 500 years earlier. So hats off to Leif. But if you think about it, the whole concept of discovering America is, well, arrogant. After all, many Native people have their own creation stories indicating that they were here from the beginning of time. And surprisingly, DNA evidence even suggests that courageous Polynesian adventurers sailed dugout canoes across the Pacific and settled in South America long before the Vikings. Second, Columbus wasn't a hero. When he set foot on that sandy beach on October 12, 1492, Columbus discovered that the islands were inhabited by friendly, peaceful people called the Taínos Arawaks. And writing in his diary, Columbus said they were a handsome, smart, and kind people. And he noted that the Arawaks were remarkable for their hospitalities. They offered to share with anyone, and when you ask for something, they never say no. The Arawaks had no weapons. Their society had neither criminals, prisons, nor prisoners. They were so kind-hearted that Columbus noted in his diary that on the day the Santa Maria was shipwrecked, the Arawaks labored for hours to save his crew and cargo, and the native people were so honest that not one thing was missing. Columbus was so impressed with the hard work of these gentle islanders that he immediately seized their land for Spain and enslaved them to work in his brutal coal mines. And in only 2 years, 125,000 of the original natives on the island were dead. Shockingly, Columbus supervised the selling of native girls into sexual slavery. Young girls of the ages 9 to 10 were the most desired by his men. In 1500, Columbus casually wrote about it in his log. He said this: 100 castellanos, that is money, are as easily obtained for a woman as for a farm. And it is very general, and there are plenty of dealers who go about looking for girls. Those from 9 to 10 years are now in demand. He forced these peaceful natives to work in his gold mines until they died of exhaustion. If an Indian worker did not deliver his full quota of gold dust by Columbus's deadline, soldiers would cut off the man's hands, tie them around his neck to send a message. Slavery was so intolerable for these sweet, gentle island people that at one point, 100 of them committed mass suicide. Catholic law forbade the enslavement of Christians, but Columbus solved this problem. He simply refused to baptize the native people of Hispaniola. On his second trip to the New World, Columbus brought cannons and attack dogs. If a native resisted slavery, he would cut off a nose or an ear. If slaves tried to escape, Columbus had them burned alive. Other times he set attack dogs to hunt them down, and the dogs would tear off arms and legs of screaming natives while they were still alive. Columbus's acts of cruelty were so unspeakable and so legendary, even in his own day, that Governor Francisco de Bobadilla arrested Columbus and his two brothers, slapped them into chains, shipped them off to Spain to answer for their crimes against the Arawaks. But the king and queen of Spain, their treasury filling up with gold, pardoned Columbus and let him go free. And one of Columbus's men, Bartholomew de las Casas, was mortified by Columbus's brutal atrocities against the native people that he quit working for Columbus and became a Catholic priest. And as I said earlier, wrote 2 histories of the Indies. But before I conclude this particular presentation, let me go back to the doctrine of discovery. And this is information from Steve Newcomb's article several years ago, 500 Years of Injustice, the Legacy of 15th Century Religious Prejudice. And he writes this: in 1823, the Christian doctrine of discovery was quietly adopted into U.S. law by the Supreme Court in the case Johnson versus McIntosh by Chief Justice John Marshall. Chief Justice Marshall observed that Christian European nations had assumed ultimate dominion over the lands of America, and that upon discovery, the Indians had lost their right to complete sovereignty as independent nations and only retained a right of occupancy in their lands. The U.S. became the successor nation to the right of discovery. The court affirmed that the United States law was based on a fundamental rule of the law of nations, that it was permissible to virtually ignore the most basic rights of indigenous heathens and so claim the unoccupied lands of America rightly belonging to discovering Christian European nations. It was understood that unoccupied lands meant unoccupied by Christians. And this principle became the cornerstone of U.S. policy over the next century. So using this principle of discovery as the premise, the Supreme Court in 1831 deemed the Cherokee Nation as a domestic dependent nation. The federal government took this to mean that treaties made with tribal nations did not recognize tribal nations as free of U.S. control. Tribal nations were domestic dependent nations, subject to the federal government's absolute legislative authority, known in law as plenary power. This power, never intended by authors of the Constitution, has been used by the United States to circumvent the terms of treaties entered into with Indian Nation, despite the fact that treaties are supposed to be supreme law of the land. Steal the homelands of Indian peoples living east of the Mississippi River by removing them from their traditional ancestral homelands through the Indian Removal Act of 1835. Use a congregational statute known as the General Allotment Act of 1887 to divest Indian people of some 90 million acres of their land. Steal the sacred Black Hills from the Great Sioux Nation in violation of the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie, which recognized the Sioux Nation's exclusive and absolute possession of their lands. These are just a few examples of how the United States government has used the Johnson versus McIntosh and Cherokee Nation versus Georgia decisions to callously disregard the human rights of Native peoples. Indeed, countless U.S. Indian policies have been based on the underlying hidden rationale of Christian discovery, a rationale which holds that the heathen indigenous peoples of the Americas are subordinate to the first Christian discoverer or its successor. And by penalizing Native people on the basis of their non-Christian religious beliefs and ceremonial practices, stripping them of most of their lands and most of their sovereignty, the Johnson versus McIntosh ruling stands as a monumental violation of the natural rights of humankind, as well as the most fundamental human rights of indigenous people. So let's come clean. Let's tell the truth about Christopher Columbus. Let's boycott this outrageous holiday because it honors a mass murderer. And if we skip the cute song that I grew up in elementary school with, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, I don't think first graders will miss it much, do you? And while we're at it, let's rewrite the history books. That has been happening to some extent, but I still think it needs to be done more so. So that's my presentation of some work that I have done several years ago. But I also like to offer some myths, facts, and implications that was compiled, again, when they celebrated the 500th anniversary by Phyllis Brady. And then some questions that were also compiled by, I don't remember now who that was by, but first of all, a myth. Columbus discovered the Americas. Well, the Americas had been inhabited thousands of years ago. Evidence in Virginia was, in fact, found 15,000 years ago. But rather, Columbus was lost and ended up invading the Caribbean. Looking for a new route to India, he bumped into the islands of the Caribbean, a part of which has become known as the West Indies because of Columbia's mistakes. And so the implications of that is that neither historical distortions nor military strength can alter the realities, the real realities of history and sovereignty by other peoples. A myth. Columbus and the explorers who followed him wanted to improve the quality of life for people in the Americas. Well, the fact is that Columbus's real mission was to seek gold and glory in the name of God in Spain. And when gold was found to be quite scarce, the Americas came to be viewed as a source of inexpensive labor for Europeans. And when enslaved American Indians became scarce because they could not survive the brutality and diseases in Europe and the Americas, the slave trade of Africans was launched to provide a new source of forced labor. And the implication, might and riches make right, has been prevailing code of colonization and militarisms throughout most of the world. And are there not better ways for everyone to live and work? Myth. Columbus was attacked by savage natives and had to defend their crew. Well, the first peoples of the Caribbean, such as the Arawaks and the Taino, were people so full of love and without greed. And I believe there is no better race or better land in the world. That is by Columbus's own account. And so they could coexist with other groups, including the Caribs, who had been erroneously portrayed as cannibalistic. They were resourceful, carefully preserving the earth. And so they were able to feed millions of people as early as even 8 BC. Implications. Judging people's actions out of context is danger. Throughout history, invaded people have been portrayed as warlike and savage. Their behavior or reaction is often used as justification for suppression of them by more powerful people. Myth. Native Americans were historical figures. They have not been able to survive the rigors of modern life, so there's only a small, insignificant number left today. Well, the fact is Native Americans exist today and as a whole have tremendous potential political and potential numerical power. Despite centuries of massive destructive forces directed against them, there are, at least in around 2013, 5.2 million Native Americans living in what is now the United States. And there are vast numbers beyond this in the other Americas to the north and the south of the United States. So the implications of that, all of us, including young children, must recognize that the U.S. is not the only, nor the largest, nor even the central location for Native people of the Americas. Continuing to relegate Native people to the past is itself a form of genocide. It denies an actual existence, hence the rights of a whole group of people. Myth, real Indians look and act a certain way. They are distinguishable as Indians by their physical characteristics, their dress, their dwellings, and their location. Facts, there are more than 567 different federally recognized indigenous nations in the United States. Native peoples vary greatly in looks, speech, lifestyles, and even beliefs, depending on their nation, their clan, their region, their parental heritage. Many Native Americans are urban, not rural or reservation dwelling, and many are of mixed heritage or even cross-clan, cross-racial. The implications, many more people are Native American or mixed Native American than is assumed by most non-Native people. Native American identification needs to be determined by Native people, not by others. At one time, the federal guideline was you had to be 25% to be considered Native. But the government has no right to determine who is Native and who is not Native. It's up to each individual tribe. And concern about Native people dressing or living differently varies from tribe to tribe, or even the way people think or do things, or what they should do is a discrepancy that other people might have, is an error in judgment. Myth, Native Americans share only a biological heritage. Well, Native Americans share numerous heritage, ethnic heritage, cultural heritage, historical heritage, and spiritual heritage. And the shared spiritual heritage is primarily focused on connectedness. Even though Native people vary, basically they share a respect for the earth and life and see themselves as only a part of the whole universe, not the center or master of it. Implications. Native people are neither totally the same nor totally different, one from another. There are strong bonds between all indigenous Native peoples, but individuals and groups are unique in themselves. Myth, oral history, as shared by Native people, is not real history. Real history is documented in books, not told in stories. Well, here's a fact. A sense of history is often viewed differently by Native and European Americans. Eurocentric history is generally viewed as past and about people, dead people. It is focused on discovery, generally meaning power and domination over other people and over the earth. It is generally about glory. It is a winner's history. Technology is important in Eurocentric history, and technology is used to record, share, and legitimize history. Whereas Native-centric history is generally a part of whole lives. It is about continuity, connectedness in life, relationships, the whole universe, not just human creatures. In this whole context, history lives and is passed down through stories about harmony, personal skills, and about the balance that must be maintained between all inhabitants of the earth. So the implications of that is it is easy to see how a Eurocentric curriculum would present Columbus at the center of a whole history. His arrival in the New World and the colonization that has followed is a history of exploitation and subjugation of people and gifts of the earth, a publicized history about winning. This is not a history of sharing, learning from one another, preserving, or moderation, as would be in a Native-centric curriculum. Myth. Native Americans were treated harshly in the past, but this situation has been corrected. Well, here's a fact. Native people are still being treated unfairly, primarily through politics. Land and water rights, religious freedom, for instance, continue to be denied to Native people. Healthcare continues to be made inaccessible or denied. Economic security is in peril. Promises and treaties continue to be broken. Example would be just this pandemic that's going on. Many Native tribes are not being given the resources necessary to fight this pandemic. The implication, there are different ways of legally dominating, hurting, and even killing people. Myth. Native Americans are intent on violent retaliation. Here's the fact. Native peoples are indeed struggling to right wrongs and to defend their lands and their rights. But the focus is on retribution, fairness, and respect, not on conquest and control, destruction, and winning. The overriding purpose and fundamental belief of Native people is that nothing will survive unless everyone protects and shares this whole plantic. So the implication is that one important lesson that Native people can teach others is about the connections necessary for survival. So I also then I'd like to close with some questions. First question, Columbus sailed into the Caribbean and never set foot in what is now known as the United States. So why do we give him one of our 8 federal holidays when he never even set foot on our soil? Number 2, why would Columbus be given credit for discovering the Americas anyway, when we all know those lands were already inhabited and had been inhabited for thousands of years? In fact, many traditions have their own creation stories. Look at any of the US and see the many states, cities, and towns that all bear the Native American names of peoples who once populated these regions. Examples: Illinois, Oklahoma, Cheyenne, Nantucket, Milwaukee, Omaha, Mississippi, Tennessee, etc. Number 3, knowing that Native Americans were already here and Columbus never was here, why does anyone go along with the myth that Columbus discovered America when we know it is not true? Number 4, why aren't we taught the whole truth about Columbus' actions in the New World, where millions of Taino lived for thousands of years, and the devastating consequences of those actions? Why are we only told about Columbus as a boy who always wanted to sail and then get 3 ships, sailed across the ocean and discovered a new world? Why are we only taught about the first voyage and not the other 3 voyages when all hell broke loose? Why aren't we taught about how on the second voyage, unlike the first, when Columbus only had 3 small old ships, Columbus was given 17 large ships and 15,000 armed men eagerly signed up for the chance to go to the New World with hopes of getting rich quick on the gold to be found there? And also, why aren't we taught about the greed and brutality of the Spaniards against their Taino and the Arawaks, who have been remembered as naked savages in our history book, if at all, and how the Taino were murdered and enslaved on that second voyage. Why are we not taught about the third voyage and how when King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain heard about Columbus's actions in the New World, he was sent back to Spain in chains to stand trial for his crimes, was convicted and stripped of his title? Isn't committing the ugly part of the truth considered lying by omission? Number 5, many people will argue that Columbus brought Western civilization to what is now known as the United States. And that is the reason the U.S. bestows upon him the honor of his own holiday. But how can we make that correlation when Columbus, working for Spain, came in 1492, and the European colonizers who came here 200 years later came from England? So if Columbus is worthy of being given credit for this achievement, wouldn't it have happened 200 years earlier? And wouldn't we all be speaking Spanish now as the countries he invaded do? Number 6, some people will argue that Columbus Day is a day of recognition for Italians, an Italian Pride Day. Are Italians worthy of recognition than other ethnic groups in this country that we have proudly nicknamed the melting pot? I mean, I have heard some defenders of this reason for recognition say that Germans have Oktoberfest, the Irish have St. Patrick's Day, and Mexicans have Cinco de Mayo, but none of those are federal holidays. Fortunately, the African Americans now have Martin Luther King Day, but Native Americans still do not have a federal holiday. And I want to mention also, because I got this information in 2004 from Chief Jake Swamp, and Joanne Shenandoah and her husband George had gone to the World Parliament of Religions in Barcelona, Spain in 2004. And they were taken to this small square in which Queen Isabella granted visitors to her court, including those who had returned from state-sponsored sea voyages. And one of those persons was an explorer and former pirate named Cristobal Colon, AKA Christopher Columbus. And supposedly Colon's voyage to the Great Turtle Island was financed by Isabella with money stolen from the Jews. And when he returned in 1493, he had 24 Arawak captives whom he had enslaved and presented them as a gift to the Queen at the very spot where Chief Swamp was standing. That act initiated the death of millions of Native people, brought millions more Africans to the Western Hemisphere as property, and caused demise of hundreds of indigenous nations. The entire planetary history was affected by what took place in Barcelona, in that small place. And George writes, we learned the truth about Colon. He was not Italian. He did not come from Genoa. He wrote, thought, and spoke in Catalonian, a language distinct from Spanish. He came from a family known Colon. His father was an admiral in the Catalonian Navy, but the son had become an outlaw, hence the slight change in surnames. He spent years away from Barcelona because of his piracy until permitted through his family's influences. We learned also that Colon had specific information as to the Atlantic Ocean currents and a rough outline of the eastern part of Anahuacola. He went to court. He used this top secret data to convince the monarchs of voyage to the west, and was not only safe, but likely to be very lucrative. So again, another question, why do 17 states refuse to recognize and or celebrate Columbus Day? Why is Columbus honored with one of our 8 federal holidays when he didn't discover it? He never even set foot on US soil. His legacy is greed, theft, destruction, brutality, slave training, and murder. It is offensive to Native Americans, African Americans, Latin Americans. Native Americans who are here and are worthy of a holiday still don't have one. And that would be the end of my formal presentation. I thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Nick. That really was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And we have comments and we have questions. So I will start with comments from the Bermanzons and also from Carol Warren. They're tied together. The Bermanzons want to know if it's possible to get a copy of this fine talk, and also suggest that it should be published, where Carol Warren is saying, I would like a copy of this talk also to share with UUCC, which I believe is the Universal Unitarian Church.
I can certainly offer you a copy of it. I do not want it to be published or anything, because I don't think I have probably all the proper footnotes and everything else and all the sources footnoted in it, as I was doing it back in, I did this, the initial report of this way back in when they had the 500 years of celebrating his discovery in 1992.
Okay, well, perhaps the Bermanzons and Carol can get in touch with you after this, and you could figure out the best way to go forward.
Okay, my email, I think for the church is revnickmiles@yahoo.com.
Okay, and I will drop that in the chat.
Okay.
We have a comment from Etaqua, which is, thank you for being specific in describing the inhumane treatment of Native peoples. This has been avoided by many up to current times. Natives have been mistreated up to the present day. There were 3 classes of restrooms in the South into the 1950s. It was legal to kill a Native in New Jersey without cause until the late 1970s. My mother denied being Native till her dying day in 2006 due to fear of serious harm. Would you like to comment about that, Nick?
Well, thank you for for your gracious appreciation of the talk. And as I said, my grandfather or father would never talk about it at all. So unfortunately, I missed a lot of the heritage and learnings of my own people. That's why I guess I tend to be more pan-Indian, and then learning from many other Native tribes and some of their culture. And even JD here has been learning a lot from the Ramapo people down in North Jersey. And so he's willing to pass that information on to all of us who are part of the Association of Native Americans. And let me say too, hopefully after this pandemic is finally done with, traditionally we always met at the church basement in the church in Bloomington or Rosendale, the second Friday of each month, except for July and August usually. And sometimes in June we met up in my backyard. We have a little bit over an acre of land. And so it's not just for Native people, for anybody who's willing, wants to come and have potluck dinner, and eventually we get out the drum and we'll sing, and some people will get up and dance. And once in a while, we will have a special ceremony.
That sounds excellent, Nick. Thank you. We do have some more comments. Comment by Craig. This lecture by Reverend Nick Miles is beyond excellent in sharing insights. I remember speaking with Nick yesterday during the tech rehearsal and him observing that Nick saying, I'm not an expert in this field, but I've done a lot of research on, finding out about this. I hope it's important. And I observed that I was sure that people were going to learn a great deal because I had seen the notes for this earlier on. And as you can tell, Nick, people are impressed with this, definitely impressed. There is a question, unless you'd like to make a comment, Nick.
No, thank you. Thank you for those words.
Okay, there is a question from Andrew. In light of the history you illustrate regarding Christian dominance of indigenous people, how do you reconcile your Christian ministry? And before you respond, there is a comment by Etakwa. Some Christians follow the path of love, some follow the ways of the world. Excellent. So the question was asked and then the comment was made following that, but I'll let you answer the question.
I became a Christian pastor. I mean, as I said in my introduction, that's another story of how I was called into ministry when I was 12 years old. Because a letter was written by the minister who baptized me and was given to me by my parents when I became 12 years old. I was baptized as an infant. And the letter basically spoke of hopefully following a course that emulated who Jesus was. And as I became more aware of Native spiritual traditions, I actually, let me go back a moment. In college, I actually, so that I wouldn't be brainwashed on one particular religion, I took a lot of college, I sort of minored in religion in college. So I took anthropology of religion, sociology of religion, psychology of religion, world religions. So I would have a well-rounded education about different spiritual traditions. And I believe that I can't judge how God chooses to reveal himself in a different culture, in different mediums that I may not be totally familiar with or totally understand. And so I became a Christian pastor because I felt that Jesus was born in the very nature of God himself. And so it assures me of salvation. So I want to share that message also with other people, but it doesn't deny any other spiritual traditions whom God chose to reveal to in different mediums, in different ways that I don't totally understand because I don't totally understand the cultures. And so I follow some of my Native spiritual traditions and I follow my Christian traditions. And I don't agree with all the Native spiritual traditions. I don't agree with all the Christian traditions. There are numerous different denominations in Christianity, far too many, I think.
Thank you, Nick. There's another question from Craig. I think you answered the previous one well, particularly given the distinctions, but spirituality and faith are very personal. But the follow-up is, are you optimistic we are near replacing Columbus Day as a national holiday and replacing it with a celebration of indigenous people? I know there are some states that do celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, but federal holiday is still Columbus Day.
Well, I think, yeah, as you said, I think there are more states recognizing that, and I honor New Paltz for having also gotten rid of Columbus Day and calling it Indigenous Day now. And in fact, there's a kindergarten teacher in the Divine school system, in the Newport school system, Divine School, basically who has been working with NEDOP KEDOP to basically incorporate more and more proper Native history and culture in her curriculum. And so we really appreciate that. And I know that she's working also on trying to extend that to other parts of the school system. And so I basically honor New Paltz for proclaiming Columbus Day, now Indigenous Day. And hopefully there's more so. And I would like to see more cities and states or other areas, maybe at least what's the word? Question or have a plaque placed on their statues about who Columbus really was and what he did discover, that he's discovered, in his mind, he discovered some of these countries, but in fact, maybe it was not a discovery, but an invasion. So I would, I'm not in favor of people just tearing down statues, but rather bringing it to the various legislative bodies to actually have a serious discussion about who he was and is that statue proper or not for that particular community. Because as I read from the World Parliament of Religions, that Columbus was not Italian. So why would they consider Columbus Day a national holiday? I don't know if that answers his question.
Well, it's just another excuse, I guess, for a celebration is what it comes down to. But I do appreciate the point you were making about statues and perhaps having interpretive text that more completely explains all of the context around the statue as opposed to the mythology around the person that is represented in the statue. Go ahead.
Thank you. That was the word I was looking for, interpretive.
Oh, right, no problem. Amy Trumpeter has made the comment, thank you. Might we continue on the path to revoke the doctrine of discovery? And actually, that last part is with a question mark. Would you like to answer?
I'm sorry, repeat that again?
Might we continue on the path to revoke the doctrine of discovery?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good. That was a quick one. It says the name is Cora Chandler, but it's signed Robin. We are Indians from New Jersey. My father told me not to stare into the fire because it is impolite. Could you tell me why?
I've never heard that before because when we have our equinox and solstice celebrations, the fire is very important for us. And so Iroquois, for example, who had made a comment earlier, basically part of our ceremony basically is to take some tobacco and think about some of the things like in the fall, you want to clean your house out, clean some of those bad habits out, clean some of those bad thoughts that you have maybe, and put them into that tobacco and then discard them into the fire. Because during the winter, we want to reevaluate our lives and think and make some plans about how we want to change our lives, having thrown out a lot of the negative stuff and everything else. So fire is very important. But so yeah, you're staring into the fire when you're throwing your tobacco in there and offering your prayers to the Creator, because the fire is important because the smoke is carrying your words to the Creator.
Okay, I'm actually going to ask to unmute Etiquette because perhaps they have something.
That's fine. That's fine with me.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes, I have never heard that about staring into the fire. Because because the spirit of the fire is not necessarily in the fire. See, the question of politeness would be more honoring the spirit. It's like the spirit of water is in the water, but it's also outside the water. So it's, people may have been thinking of the spirit of these different forces, entities in a human manner, but they're not confined as we are to our physical body. They exist in harmony and unity with the rest of creation. So it's, you honor the fire by thinking or talking to the fire. So there's nothing that would prohibit us from speaking to the fire. So why not look at it? I have never heard of that. Like Nick said, I've never heard of that before, not just to stare into the fire.
Right. Thank you for that.
To me, it's one way to become one with the fire.
Right. Thank you. And also thank you, Nick, because not only, well, you were unable to answer the question because you've never heard it, but you also gave us additional information around the importance of the fire in your traditions. And so I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We do have some more, let's see, from Phil. Thank you, Nick, as always, for the privilege to hear you sharing your knowledge and wisdom on this day when many in the USA and beyond are celebrating a presidential election outcome. How do you see the prospects for what history you've shared today being truly acknowledged and its consequences reckoned with in a just manner for our posterity?
Wow.
No pressure, Nick, no pressure.
That's a loaded question. I mean, there's so much more that has to be done in still recognizing treaties. I mean, Standing Rock, just recent events that have happened there is a prime example of Native people still being ignored and respected for who they are, and treaties being honored and being taken advantage of. Most of the pipelines are going through Native territory because people feel that it's expendable, but it's not expendable. And it partly has to do with this concept of ownership of land, which is from Western civilization. Native people don't feel you can own land. On a reservation in Virginia, you don't own the land in Virginia. It's tribal land. It's tribal property. You're given the right to live on a piece of land. When my father had moved back, he grew up I grew up in New Jersey. And when he moved back, he was given 4 acres of land to use, which he, basically farmed part of it, and part of it he rented out to a local farmer. But you don't, and then and what happens then, of course, is he had about $80,000 worth of equity in buildings. And when after my father died and my mom remarried, she had to move. And so she sold that property for $25,000 because the only people who are allowed to live there are somebody who's Pamunkey of that heritage. And so you don't get your equity back too much on that. My feeling is that the present president has been ignoring a lot of environmental tracts of land, opening up, Alaska for more, looking for gas and everything, and just not honoring the climate change and everything else. So I think there needs to be we need to go back and listen to a lot more native people who still live off the land and have that knowledge of how to live off the land and not just utilize it and rape the land, for their own benefit. We need more Mitaki Oyasin. We are related not only to each other as human beings, to animals, to the birds, to the fish, to the land. We're all related. We're all connected. And what happens, like I said earlier, what happens on one part of creation either indirectly or directly affects all of creation. And so we need to see that and not make such hasty decisions always.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to let you know that Robin has responded to the information that you and Etakwa provided, saying maybe that is what their father rather, meant. I was very young. Thank you. And also wrote, thank you everyone for giving me more knowledge. So I wanted to share that with you. I think that we have time for a couple of more questions before we wrap up this program. And we certainly have a couple of questions. Here we are from Andrew. Can you suggest a resource about Indigenous history that is not biased by Europeans?
No, maybe Idiqua might have more knowledge of a good resource. I mean, I got, Andrew's my neighbor. Is that who it is? Come look at my library, Andrew. You might find something there of interest.
People are starting to write more information. There have been authors, Indigenous peoples, who have written. I'm not thinking of anyone right now, but I expect more to be coming out, more information when we start really clearing up society, as we change society so people are not attacked for everything they say, we'll get more information.
Thank you. And last is from Robin. The last question is, my grandfather Hill was also a native farmer in northern New Jersey. Did your family also go to Patterson to sell your crops?
Yeah, I don't. He went to a whole bunch of different farms. And the thing I remember most about that is that my grandfather, he basically was lived by the penny. And so many a time he ran out of gas and us kids had to get out and push him to the nearest gas station.
Well, hey, listen, but that's the kind of thing, that memory that sticks with you forever, right?
Oh, yes.
Part of your lived experience. Yeah, I just want to alert people that Sarah and Amy have dropped into the chat a couple of suggested titles. So you can, copy and paste them or write them down very quickly. And Robin says, great story, thank you. Wanishi, I'm sure I mispronounced that, but Robin wrote that. And so anyway, shall we wrap up with the healing blessing song?
Did she have some titles or something?
They're in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Oh, do you want me to read them out? I'm sorry.
Oh, Linda was going to copy it down.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm actually, because it's being recorded, I have them.
Okay.
And so the chat will be saved also. So when I send the recording to you, you will get a copy of the chat.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Robin. And where does Robin live?
North Jersey.
Oh, Robin lived in New Jersey, I guess.
Oh, okay. I was wondering whereabouts. We're not that far away from Jersey. It's an hour drive up, maybe.
Well, Robin, if you could write down where you lived in New Jersey, that would be helpful. Not yet. I'm monitoring the chat, but in any event, Sussex County, New Jersey, near High Point Park. Thank you, Robin. Does that ring any bells with you, Nick?
That's near New Brunswick.
Don't ask me. I'm a
Oh.
native New Yorker. I don't know about New Jersey.
Look it up.
But the information's in the chat, so I'm sure you can Google it.
Okay, thank you.
In any event, thank you all who have participated with the comments and the interesting questions. And would you now like to end with the healing blessing song?
Yes. Yes. So this is a Delaware healing blessing song. It was taught to us, well, taught to me by Jack Preston, I said, who was my teacher on the drum. And we don't have any English interpretation of the song. Quite often, a song is thought of and sung by someone, and it becomes connected with certain events. And so it becomes that song now. So this is our prayer song that we use for our Association of Native Americans that we always close important events with. And I invite people to feel the spirit of the song. And because a song is sung 4 times through, in honor of the 4 directions, the 4 seasons, the 4 basic colors of the human race, and the 4 basic elements of the earth, it is inclusive. So if you know someone who needs healing, if you know someone who needs a special blessing, be thinking of that person in your mind, and your thoughts will be going out to them, and hopefully they will begin some healing process. Chile do de, Chile do de, oe oe. Chile do de, Chile do de, oe oe. Shuge, shuge, easkate. Wadaha, 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 ode, Chile, no, de, no, hey, no. Shuge, shuge, easkate, wadaha, 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 ode, Chile, no, de, no, hey, no. Chile. Wadaha, 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 ode, Chile, do, ode, oe, oe. Shuge, shuge, easkate, wadaha, 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 ode, Chile, do, ode, oe, oe. Chile. Chile, do, de, Oskate, Wadaha, 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 Ode, Shile, Dode, Ohe, Shuge, Shuge, Oskate, Wadaha, 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 Ode, Shile, Dode, Ohe, Shile, Wadaha, 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 Ode, Shile, Dode, Ohe, Shuge, Shuge, Oskate, Wadaha, 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 Ode, Shile, Dode, Ohe, Shuge, Shuge, Oskate, Wadaha, 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 Ode, Shile, Dode, Ohe.
Thank you very much for that, Nick. That was wonderful. It really was. It had me sort of drumming my fingers, but also it gave me a warmth and a calm. So I appreciate that. At this point, I would like to invite everybody, if they would like, to turn their camera on so that you can wave, laugh, smile, whatever, at Nick Miles, who gave us an incredible program this evening. Thank you so much, Nick. We at the African Roots Center truly appreciate you allowing us to host this event for you.
Really rather dark.
Thank you all. Thank you all for listening and putting up, being patient with my delivery.
Thank you.
I think I have to ask a couple of people to, I'm getting to you, Sally.
Okay. Unable to start video.
Right, because you had started it, so during the presentation, so
Sorry. Anyway,
you should be able to do it now.
okay. Thank you. Yes.
And Amy,
Yeah, there's
is Amy Trompeter still there? There you are. Sorry.
okay. So we can get
It's sometimes it's difficult for me with the Brady Bunch screen. But anyway, and wait, Andrew and Nancy switched sides because you were sitting the other way.
He did.
He has a habit of doing that. He has a habit of doing that.
Oh, okay,
Switch sides.
okay. But anyway, so thank you.
Wonderful, Nick. That was
a
great.
great talk.
Yeah.
Great.
And
Thank you.
we should talk about getting it out so people can have it to yes, yeah. Carol agrees.
Right. Well, you can do, like I said, I suggested, and you have his email address, obviously, but I also put it in. Is there anyone else who would, before we sign off, like to unmute and say something?
And Troy Ellen, you should, show us your video. All we see is African Roots Center.
Well, that's because I'm
Hi.
what?
Show yourself, Troy.
Yeah, Troy.
Show yourself, Troy. Show
Fine.
yourself.
I just want to recognize that Sarah, which I don't know if Sarah's on the left or the right.
On the left. Actually,
Yeah, I see.
it's Mary Savage, Nick.
Thank you.
I want to say that I've had the benefit of your spirit and your presence and your drum, but I've never quite had the sermon. And because it is so true and comes from such a place of generosity and love, instead of making me furious and frantic, as I usually am at things like this, it was extremely healing.
Yeah.
No, you're welcome.
I just wanted to say thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You are all welcome for sure. You're all welcome. Everything else, and during Advent and Christmas Eve, I'm going to be preaching in Saugerties Reformed Church.
All right. Cool.
And thank you, Troy, for hosting it and being such a really good moderator.
Oh, thank
Right.
you.
Yes, thank you.
It's good to hear that because sometimes I could be just saying, wah, 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 wah. Not sure. So I appreciate the feedback.
You have no idea how important she is to this whole process, because I am computer challenged. And so she had to get me through this, not only yesterday for rehearsing, but even today trying to, get trying to do this Zoom thing, because I'm computer challenged. This is a struggle sometimes for me.
Thank you
thank
very
you, Troy.
much. Thank you very much for
Yay,
that.
Troy Ellen.
Thank you.
Is
This was
there-
excellent.
Yes, thank you.
Craig, you wanted to speak?
I would like to just add that the night was, you really were like the collective. I really appreciated that. Is there a place in the Hudson Valley where the drumming and all of the culture that you described is available to the public on a regular basis? Is there some venue people can go if they're interested in learning more?
After the pandemic, we'll be doing, like, as I said earlier, we'll be doing our Association of Native American meetings the second Tuesday of the month. Second Friday of the month, except for July and August, and possibly June. Sometimes we have the meeting here at our house in Ulster Park. And then there's also, we do the equinox and solstice ceremonies over at Seed Song Farm. That's over on 60 Esopus Avenue in Kingston.
160.
That's usually always at 5:30 most of the time. But if you send me your email, I can pass that on to the person who does our emails through Anna, as well as to Sally and Paul, who do the emails for Nidop Cheetah for the various events that we also sponsor through them.
That sounds excellent. The culture and the food, like fry bread, I believe, is the is
Well,
just having an opportunity to try those culinary, cultural cooking techniques and recipes, just to learn. It's just an opportunity. We really need to learn. We don't know, like you said, the 1492 is what we know. It's unfortunate that we cling to that. And the college here, you said New Paltz, the high school, they added it to their calendar several years ago, right? That's
Yeah.
what you referenced?
I don't know that the Devine School, elementary school.
No, it's all of New Paltz. The school system in New Paltz now celebrates Indigenous Peoples Day.
Oh yeah, they celebrate it. Yeah.
And they did add it to their calendar and had a resolution. They wrote why they changed it.
Right.
Because of the genocide, because of the things you talked about.
Yep.
And while they did make that resolution, I don't know to what degree they actually celebrate, what programming they have. I can only say that as an alumni of New Paltz, the college, it came after the high school. I mean, it came after the Huguenot school district, so to speak, right? The local school district. It took several years, and they just added it this year to the academic calendar. They have slash, so it starts out Indigenous Peoples Day / Columbus Day. Okay.
The college always takes longer.
Well, I don't know if I want to
We're
make
very
that.
challenged in that respect.
Well, I was wondering if that's what you want to contribute. I can't say. I don't represent them.
Well,
just as
I lived there. I grew up in New Paltz.
Well, the diversity and inclusion is certainly a priority. And we see the building names changed and recognition of slavery. And how
It
about
took a
in
lot of fighting to get that to happen.
several years? Well, I only think, I think fighting is what we want to avoid. We want to have the dialogue. The president really initiated that in a very positive way. For the first time, I thought the college took 2 years, but they had discussions and they talked about civility and people can listen to one another. And that's what we're missing, that type of leadership. So hopefully it can continue with this indigenous. So here's what happened. Every year I have my Facebook, I say, why? Columbus, I cross it out. This is a college. Why are you still doing Columbus? So here's what I wrote. If I could just share this briefly.
We're actually wrapping up. How long is it, Craig?
Maybe 6 sentences. Party like it's 1492. This dated before they had it. Is that okay? Can I just tell it
Yes, please.
It was a Facebook post linking to the calendar, and we had just had Columbus Day at that time. And here's what it said. Party like it's 1492. Proceeding festive fireworks, Hugo the Hawk, the school's mascot, can lead a Columbus parade with masked, socially and physically distanced students, staff, and professors to celebrate Christopher sailing the ocean blue that turned the sea blood red. Status quo sophomoric small school of mediocrity. The New Paltz Central School District, the town of New Paltz, and other SUNY schools will recognize, celebrate, and honor Taino, Lenape, and the numerous others on Indigenous Peoples Day. Become the change and join in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you, Craig.
Can I, let me just add one little bit of information. In September 24th, what was the year? 1994, Adam Nordwell, who was Chippewa Indian, went to Italy, to Rome, Italy, in full regalia, took his spear, got out of the plane, went to the end of the runway, and discovered Italy in the name of Native Americans. And New Paltz College actually honored him in 2006 with a honorary degree. He was here in person.
I think that's excellent. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been a wonderful evening. I want to thank you. I know some people had to drop off, but I want to thank all of you who joined us this evening. You can always check out our Facebook page or AfricanRootsLibrary.org for more information about upcoming programs. And thank you, Reverend Nick Miles, for an incredibly informative and engaging evening. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So now it's over, Nick, and you can calm down.
Okay.
Good night to everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.
Okay, you also. Thank you.
I think we all do.
Turn it off.